Let's stay in Iowa. I realize the Hawkeyes are playing out of town this weekend, and the 2016 presidential caucuses are a bit far off, but it turns out there was a bike race on Sunday too, so why not? Quick look at the line here, and again you'll see CannondaleCyclocrossWorld.com's Tim Johnson right in front of that dip. And you'll also see Giants' Adam Craig struggling to peer over everyone to get a look at the start official, and you'll see some dudes in the back not paying attention as the whistle goes, because this was a really short wait on the line. Johnson seems to get out of the gate quickest again, but is overtaken by Bairden before the hole shot. Cal Giants' Yannick Ekman would weasel his way up the inside on the Yule Logs obstacle and do most of the pace setting for the first lap. It wasn't enough to force any major separations in the field, but it did prompt some single-file riding, unless, of course, your name is Adam Craig. Those foreground ruts there reveal some decent moisture in the soil, and it really came into play on the main obstacle of the day, this steep, log-preceded, loose, and just a little bit slippery run-up, which forced most of the pack into short, quick steps to assure traction. But even followed by fast descents, the bunch kept stubbornly together, to the point that Cal Giants' Logan Owen made his first attack even earlier than the previous day, at the conclusion of the first lap. There wasn't an immediate separation, though we were treated to watching Johnson, whose carrying technique had been the topic of some discussion on the internet earlier in the week, cartoonishly bump himself into Owen's rear wheel. But it was the run-up where the Cal Giant rider made the first separation, utilizing a kinda risky stride on the run-up's grassiest and least steep line, getting over a second by these enthusiastic spectators, and catching some bigger names probably further down than they wanted to be. Johnson and Trebone joined Owen on the descent, and the trio had a very definite gap over the group led by Raleigh Clement's Alan Krughoff, and unlike the previous day's race, the Escape showed no hesitation in sharing the work. This time it was Johnson's turn to drive tempo in the run-up, using short, quick steps on a slightly more direct line to briefly gap the others. Owen caught back, but even with Trebone calling it a day and the 18-year-old somehow forgetting to grab the rear end of his bike over the barriers, the gap was alarming enough that we got to see Rafa Focus's Jeremy Powers grimace like we haven't seen him grimace on a third lap in quite some time. But in this sport, it only takes one mistake, and you can just barely see it from Owen here. With Johnson and Powers both driving, the Cal Giant rider takes an ill-timed pit and is snatched up by the chase moments later. With Johnson 7 seconds ahead, Powers threatens to ride the run-up but can't quite get it going, and has to settle for merely dropping Owen, who again struggled with footing, instead. By 4 to go, it's Johnson and Powers in dueling chases, 10 seconds apart, and Powers plays his trump card, riding the run-up. While it's a hugely impressive feat, it takes him only a second less to complete the climb than Johnson, and by the barriers, the CannondaleCyclocrossWorld.com rider's gap has almost doubled, making me wonder if Powers might have blown up a bit in his effort. Not sure if you're aware of this, but sit up and stretch is the international sign for chase over. Meanwhile, Raleigh Clement's Jamie Driscoll, Owen, and Bairden had regrouped, and despite Owen's continued footing issues on the run-up, the trio reeled in Powers and even made an effort to gap him after a late pit, but just before 2 to go, Powers recovered, Johnson continued not to falter, and lest anyone say the group wasn't racing for second, Driscoll mock-celebrated a bike throw win at the bell. Bairden tried an early escape over the run-up, where Powers and Driscoll had one of the most polite non-collisions I've ever seen, but despite his earlier efforts, Powers was once again able to muster his trademark decisive late-race surge, not that it mattered to Johnson, who was already high-fiving the crowd on the finishing stretch. The closest finish came in the battle for third, where Owen, despite a gamely effort to impede Bairden's getting around, couldn't recover from a long lead-out and was forced to settle for fourth. I'm Cosmo Catalano, and that's how the race was won.